Good morning, ladies, gentlemen and members. Welcome to today's Development Regulation Committee meeting, as you can see in Committee Room 1. Before I open the formal part of the meeting, there are a few housekeeping points which I need to read out. This room is fitted with microphones and automatic cameras and sound tracking. Given this, I would like to remind members of a couple of things. Please continue to speak clearly and try not to whisper. Keep other sound to a minimum, as whispering, shuffling of papers and typing loudly on a keyboard might bring the camera onto you. Also bear in mind that because the ceiling microphones are very sensitive, they might pick up conversation in the room, including informal remarks. And finally, please refrain from using a mobile phone, as when the camera zooms in, not only capture the speaker, but also those next to them. Last 2 points are particularly important, as we are live streaming the meeting on YouTube, and a recording of that will be available on that channel at any time in future. We're not expecting a fire drill this morning, so if the alarm should sound, please follow officers out of the doors behind you and behind me, and out, leave the building for the nearest fire exit, which is down the stairs into the foyer, into the street, where you'll be making your way to the location assembly point to the grounds of the cathedral opposite. Thank you very much indeed. So we go to today's agenda, which is membership, apologies and substitutions, and declaration of interest. Emma.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Councillor Mike Garnett, for whom Councillor Jeff Henry is substituting, and from Councillor Dave Harris, for whom Councillor Aidan McGurran is substituting.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you both. Any declaration of interests? Councillor Giles?
Yes, some 12 years ago, I believe, I was involved with the first application for the first item on the agenda. But having said that, I will be here with an open mind. But as you probably know, Chairman, it was a somewhat controversial application, but I'll leave that to the officers to tell us background to it.
I understand you've had a conversation with Susan.
Through, yeah.
Yeah, through it.
Yeah.
About it, that's.
Okay, thanks so much indeed. That's noted, yeah. Any other declaration of interests? No. Okay. Agenda item 2 is minutes of the last meeting, which was Friday, 28th of June. Is that okay for me to sign them as a record? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item is public speaking. Do we have any public speakers today, Emma?
No, Chairman, there are no public speakers today.
Okay, thank you. Item 4 is mineral and waste. 4.1, land at Green Acres, Placards Lane, Wallingford. It's in the hand of Terry Burns. Over to you, Terry.
Thanks. Oh, we're good to plan.
And then share.
Good. You're getting there, guys.
And then just this button down the bottom will start it. Yeah, there we go.
Lovely. Okay, so land at Green Acres. That one. The actual site, you guys have probably been aware from previous applications that we've had on this particular site, is located off Placards Lane. The area outlined in black is the total site area, and with the original recycling building, that big chunky bit. And on the top end of the site is the recovery building. Why isn't this moving forward? There we are. Ignore that one. Why isn't this working? Okay, so it's jumping a screen, which is obviously not coming up. So I'll just run to this one, sorry. So this particular plan shows the current layout of the site. So it has two large recycling buildings on the site, the one to the north and the one along the western boundary, to your left. And the layout was recently approved under a previous permission, 0918. That was for the second recovery building to be created on the particular site itself. The existing recovery building is shown on the picture there, on the right hand, the large brown building with the skips in front. And the newer building is off to its left, and that's the newer building with curved roof and the solar panels sitting atop it. In the foreground is the timber recycling, which the company have planning approval for handling on the site. That's just a clearer picture of the new building, which has now become commissioned in the last 6 or 7 months, and that handles additional waste lines and really opening up space within the existing buildings and through efficiency, etc., and the modernisation of the equipment that they've got, they can handle now a lot more waste on the particular site. So the application which has now come forward before us is to increase that tonnage from 50,000 to 150,000 tonnes per annum. But also a knock-on effect of that would be HGV traffic increase. And that would go from the current 100, I think it's whatever it is, up to 200, to allow 250 HGV movements per day. That's Monday to Fridays, and 100 HGV movements on Saturdays. They were proposing early morning movements on the Saturday mornings, but I'll come on to that at the moment, but we've actually restricted that one down to the existing 3 vehicle movements during that particular time period. I'll take you through the committee report. It's fairly clear cut in that sense. On page 12, I've set out 12 and 13, the long history of this site, which goes back to the original appeal, which was granted by the inspectorate in 2012 on the site. And since that period, we've had, as I said, we've had a number of applications which have come before committee or delegated. And in more recent years, we've had 1 or 2 which have been refused. As I sat here now today, I quickly looked at the recommended conditions. I've noticed that I did miss out reference to the Good Friday operating hours, which the company have been granted. I'll pick up on that in the recommended conditions later on as a verbal addendum. So going through the report itself, the proposal, as I've mentioned, is to increase the vehicle numbers and also the through tonnage on the particular site. On pages 15 through to 19, I've gone through the various policy requirements, which covers both ourselves and Colchester, and the National Planning Policy Framework. Page 18, we've gone into the consultations. Now, Colchester City Council have sent through their environmental health officers' comments. They did make a planning comment themselves, but they also included a number of objections which have been sent through. Now, running in the background to this application, there was some comments from the parish council. Had we taken on board representations made by third parties, which didn't appear on our website? Apparently, a lot of comments had gone through to Colchester City's website. As when they get this application from ourselves, it looks like they advertise it themselves, and a number of people they got confused and responded over to Colchester City. We've taken on board those comments and they've been included in the report itself. So we've looked at those, and it doesn't prejudice what's been said in this particular report. But as the objections, representations didn't come to us directly, and they went to Colchester City themselves, they've been noted, but they haven't been included within this particular report itself as representations made specifically to ourselves, which is what our site notices and our press notices request. They are links, but people don't actually read them. The various parish councils I've set out, West Burgold, Wormingford on page 19, Fordham and 8 Ash Green were the adjacent or affected parish councils. They've all raised objection, and the principal one being on the increase in traffic numbers, and that those have been set out in the committee report itself. We've gone forward looking at the various other consultees, and I've picked up on the County Council's noise consultant, who's made recommendations, and that's been included in the report, and as appendices, with their 3 noise responses which came through as the determination of this application took its course. The other consultees have been picked up on in normal manner and made 1 or 2 representations. Highways have been picked up on page 24. And as you can see, they've had no objections, subject to requests to secure by legal agreement the road junction improvements. And as you can see on page 24, if that legal agreement didn't go ahead, for road junction signs to go up and for a voluntary agreement to be addressed by the applicant on their HGV routing requirements. I've picked up on those in my appraisal and said yay or nay and whether that's a good idea or not, and I'll come through on that as I go through this appraisal. Representations being set out on pages 24 through 28. And as you can see from those representees' comments, like the parish councils, the majority of those are related to traffic and traffic implications on the local amenity, etc. On the appraisal on page 27 starting, I think the 3 main ones would be the principle of development, the traffic and the noise aspects. And I've picked up on the representations made, which I've just picked up and clarified with you about made to Colchester City, and they've also gone into appraisal E on the condition clarity. We've taken this opportunity to clarify one of the conditions which the applicants looked at, and they are happy with that. But we'll come on to that now as I go through it. So page 28 on the principle of the development and whether it's an appropriate location for this particular site. We've picked up on top of page 28 what the applicant has said in support of the application. They've been able to increase recycling and recovery of materials, and with the new line within that new building, which is on the screen there, that's given them greater efficiency, hence the reason that they can accept more waste, recycle more, but the knock-on effect of that would be it has to go out the door somewhere and it has to come in through the door somewhere, which would be in traffic. So traffic is the main issue on this particular site. In terms of what happens within the buildings, we don't normally control aspects of processing within buildings. That's an environment agency aspect if it requires permitting. We look at the impact of the planning issues of the building itself. Was it an acceptable use of development in that neck of the world? And from a planning point of view, these buildings were acceptable. We control what's actually happening in those buildings through the normal noise, dust, traffic conditions which pertain to the site boundary. So what happens within that building is really a non-planning issue as long as it's not impacting the outside areas. And the Environment Agency, through their permitting, would deal with the processing activities carried on within those particular buildings. And it's the same for any industrial development. Planning would look at the nature of the building, its landscape, ecological design terms, etc. But what usually occurs within the buildings is not usually a planning issue in that respect. So the efficiency of the plant, pat them on the back. Yes, they are doing an efficient operation. They are recycling more, and they are an established and getting to be a successful enterprise. I've said in the report that, yeah, going back to the appeal days, as the inspector said at the time, it's probably the wrong place that this development is now developed further. It's out in the countryside, a rural area. And as I said in this particular report, and that is probably enough now. We're now jammed packed on that particular site in terms of what they've got, buildings, vehicle-wise, storage, etc. So any further developments that could possibly come forward in the future, which would then have knock-on effects in terms of traffic implications, would probably be a red light to ourselves, and we would have to look at it very carefully to see if there's any environmental impact impacting even further on the local amenity of that particular location. So gone through it in fairly lot of detail, but on page 30, in terms of in principle, that the location is considered appropriate given the existing waste use, and subject to the further considerations below on the environmental effects and amenity impacts, which I picked up on. In terms of traffic, as I said, they wanted an increase in traffic numbers. They've done traffic surveys. The Highways Authority have come down and said, yes, that is acceptable. Given the location and given the road capacity, there's no issues on that, subject to the legal agreement for junction improvements being carried out. On the left-hand side of that picture is, if you can imagine, Packard's Lane is the road running off to the right, and Fordham Road is the road running north-south. So the left-hand design detail is the existing junction arrangements from Packard's Lane onto Fordham Road. Just off to the right-hand side would be the developer's operations. So they come out of the site, they can either turn right and go down into Colchester, or they could turn left and they would come onto the junction onto Fordham Road and either go south through Fordham or go north to wherever they're going in terms of market requirements. So the existing junction is on the left. The proposed junction improvements would be on the right, essentially making the top part of the lane the in route into Packard's Lane, and the southern bit of the junction the out route from Packard's Lane onto Fordham Road. At the moment, there's a split lane on the left-hand detail for in and out on the northern bit and in and out on the southern bit, which makes it quite confusing, difficult to turn even for cars, and visibility can be quite difficult. So they've identified as a benefit to their application coming forward that junction improvements on this particular junction would probably help all concerned. Highways have accepted that, subject to a legal agreement being put in place, that we secure that in place before the development actually takes place. So in terms of the traffic issues, we've gone through it in fairly robust detail from page 30 through 34. In actual fact, page 37 continues through. We've gone into that and we've looked at the various objections coming from the representees, etc., and the report is set out in answer to a lot of the representees' comments and the parish council comments and the third-party comments. What we normally say on a lot of applications, once vehicles go onto the public highway, once they're meeting their MOT and insurance, etc., it's down to a policing matter. The road capacity can take those numbers of vehicles. They might not be always standard everywhere in the country. There are lanes. Vehicles of all types take them. And in this particular location, we also have nearby Fairfields Farm, which has an anaerobic digester. They have a crisp factory. We also got large numbers of HGVs transiting through this location, accessing Colchester itself and the wider environs, which has nothing to do with the applicant's vehicle numbers, but they are passing HGVs. We have LGVs and we have cars all utilising the same highway system. But in terms of this particular application, after the careful appraisal, then it's been considered the highway is suitable for carrying these numbers of vehicles, subject to what Highways Authority have said in terms of the junction improvements. As a knock-on effect to that, we've gone on page 37 into the noise aspects. Now, the company noise consultant has been involved in this particular site for many years. They have been down on site in the past and done noise readings, etc. Looking at this particular application, they've seen that the principal issue could well be the noise from the traffic on the outside local amenities. Subject to various requirements, at the end of the day, and clarification from the applicant, they have come down and said, as I said in the report, that subject to the various recommendations, the application is acceptable to themselves. However, they would like to put in a baseline to avoid what's called cumulative creep, that if another application came forward in the future, we would look at the baseline of what was occurring now before, if this one got approved, what the actual baseline of their vehicles impacting the local highway and the local amenity would be. We can't put that in as a condition. We would put that in as an informative, and this would be a line in the sand that if a future application for this particular site came forward, which had traffic implications, then we could go back to this report and said, hey guys, we flagged this up. We want a baseline of what your vehicle numbers are currently doing on the current highway, and then we can assess it against potential cumulative creep. We do it in terms of noise, where we have cumulative creep. Each application coming forward adds a little bit, But ultimately, when you look at it in the background, historically to where we are now, people can then see that, well, there's been a big noise increase, but it's always been nibbled at. So in terms of traffic, we want to put a stop to that, set the ground rules and go forward. The application, the noise consultant, in line with the Highways Authority, have said that the traffic implications, both from a capacity route and from a noise generation aspect, would be acceptable subject to the conditions being in place. We have existing noise conditions on the site, which would continue. So even though if vehicles did increase and they came onto this particular site, they would still be caught by overall noise monitoring regime, which we have in place overall. On page 3940, I've set out, as I mentioned, condition clarity, and I've set out in bold where the original condition was probably a bit hazy or a bit misleading, where it mentioned movements which between 6 and 7:30 in the morning, where the other condition said shall only be outward bound movements. The original condition said, for the sake of argument, 6 vehicles, 3 in, 3 out. Between those hours, they couldn't have 3 vehicles coming in because of the restrictive condition, only outward bound. So this opportunity has been taken to clarify in the brackets behind the operating times what those movements are, and they've all been reset to vehicles going out, nothing coming in during those restrictive hours. I mentioned in picking up on the Good Friday operating hours. On page 51 and 52 of the recommended conditions at the back, I had actually missed out a paragraph which related to the allowance for Good Friday vehicle movements. That was set out in Planning Commission reference ESS 1519 COL call, which was for an application for specifically Good Friday operating hours, where it was approved, and we did put a paragraph into that particular report. Just bring it up on my screen. I can just read it out to you so that you guys are okay with that. So that particular condition, which I would recommend, if this planning application was recommended for approval, this condition, this element of the condition be transposed and put into this particular addendum. And the condition read, for the purposes of this condition and for the Good Friday bank holiday only, 12 refuse vehicles shall be allowed to leave the site between the hours of 7 to 7:30 and return no later than 4:30, making a total of 24 movements. Upon return, the 12 refuge vehicles shall park up on the access roads as shown in a plan which we appended and which was presented to this committee a while back. So if planning approval were forthcoming, I would pull that condition, that element of the condition out and reinsert it into page 52, condition 11 as an additional 6. And that will cover the Good Friday movements, which were erroneously missed out by my mistake, and just picking up on that. Overall, in the balance, and considering all the issues which have been raised, from a planning point of view, there's very little that we could probably recommend a refusal on. We've got the conditions in, and the report has come down on the grounds of recommending a legal agreement that planning approval will be forthcoming in this particular case. As I said, with the use of somebody else's words, it's a rather reluctant recommendation for approval. But in terms of, from the planning point of view, we don't have grounds for refusing this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Terry, for your presentation. Members, Councillor Parker first.
Yeah, when I read this application, I couldn't understand how we had a request that was for an 80% increase in vehicle movement and a 300% increase in tonnage. How do we reconcile those two? Because presumably, if you're taking an empty skip out or bringing a full skip or a full lorry back in, it doesn't work, in my view.
The applicant, as they've mentioned in the, I've gone down into that particular detail, but the way it would work is that the material comes in and I've got up on the screen now, a lot of that waste is then bulked up. So it's unbulked when it comes into the various tipper lorries, they can reprocess it, bulk it up into bales, so the vehicle numbers will change drastically and the tonnages will change drastically. So it's through the baling process, the recycling process, the bulking up, shredding, the composting, shredding up of the timber, etc. In terms of weights, they can pull in that greater tonnage. It doesn't necessarily mean that if 50 lorries bring that waste in, potentially with the bigger vehicles using Arctics, the baling, 2 vehicles could take what 12 vehicles brought in. So the compaction of the material, etc., can be achieved. They've said in terms of their ability through their waste lines within the site that they can accommodate all of this waste. And the knock-on effect would be, through their calculations, X number of vehicles, as they've requested, would go out to deliver that material as a product or to recycle it to a third party or whatever.
You okay? Do you want to come back?
No, that's fine.
Thank you. Councillor Still.
Thank you. I've got a question of my own, which is touching on Councillor Barker's question there. You're kind of implying that the weight out is less than the weight in. And the number of trucks going in have got to come out, haven't they? Even though they might be carrying less. So I'm not sure the maths on that actually add up.
I've not gone into the maths. I've gone up. Ultimately, what we're looking at is it going to have impacts on the environment? They've calculated through their business that X number of vehicles come in, they are flawed, some may go out empty, some may be repackaged up, large amounts of bales, etc. And from their calculations, that would be the result going out through the door. We have conditions on a particular site that we can monitor and get vehicle numbers. A lot of them are now electronically tagged, as we do on a lot of other sites, that if we got suspicions that they've increasing their vehicle numbers over and above, then we can quickly check that and actually check through their calculations.
I have to say that doesn't make sense in my maths either, but I'll ask my own question now. I think you said the inspector said this was the wrong place.
Sorry, yeah, it is the wrong place, but yes.
Every time I come and sit at one of these, we're looking at things in the wrong place. We're looking at waste disposal and waste reclamation in the wrong place. Just for future reference, what constitutes the right place? What would make this?
Derek, before you respond, that inspector gave permission. It was following the refusal from the county council to the application, and there was an appeal which was successful. And even the inspector recognised it was in the wrong place.
I understand what you're saying.
That's a type.
Yeah, it's just that I guess it's in the wrong place because you've got the HGV has got to go to the villages to get there, which you know I have a lot of sympathy for. It kind of implies the right place is right next to the A12 or right next to the A12.
Yep.
At a junction.
No, I would contend what you just said. Now, in terms of applications, if they're in the wrong place, we'd probably recommend refusal to you guys, or we've refused it through delegate powers. If they come in and they're in the right place and they're in line with our.
To one coming in the right place.
Chairman, the simple answer is in accordance with the Waste Local Plan, and the Waste Local Plan has a hierarchy, if you recall, with identified sites. If it's not an identified site, then it should be within an area of search that we've identified, which are normally employment areas, not all employment areas, but quite a few employment areas throughout the county. And then the third approach, if it's not within an area of search, we have a sort of criteria-based approach, which is generally based on industrial type locations. The issue here with this site historically was there was a small-scale waste operation that, if I recall, benefited from a certificate of lawful use. So it had lawful use rights and a certificate issued historically by Essex. They wanted to then expand their operation to what the big building that you see now. We refused that application. It went to appeal, and the inspector decided to allow the appeal primarily based on economic grounds, because the National Planning Policy Framework had just come out a few months before and had a real push towards the economic importance of development. If you remember, around 2012, And that seemed to gain more weight than the environmental and social impacts of the development. So they ended up with an appeal decision granted by the planning inspectorate that we've had to work with since. So the use is now well established there. The question is with this application whether the increase is acceptable in terms of vehicle movements and tonnage.
Councillor Giles.
Well, thanks, Chairman. As I said, I've had sort of long experience of this. I will ask Richard just to expand on the fact that this altered the NPPF nationally. This was not expected to go through. Having said that, it's a good firm, good company, it does a really good job. It's in the wrong place. If you look on page 31, I fully accept the inspector says, from a traffic point of view, the present site is far from ideal. Many of you know the road cutting through, it's a rat run really through from the south side of Colchester, running through if you go to Bury St Edmunds or the Fuels or wherever. The increase from 50 to 150, again, do the maths. This is an HGV going through a small rural village every 6 minutes. 6 minutes, every 6 minutes.
It says 2.5.
Well, yeah, if you take them out again as well. And to me, it's a sticking plaster, that junction on Packard's Lane. I mean, it's piffling. There are several accidents there, but, you know, I really have got a problem with this because it's such a massive increase. I have no problems with what it's doing at the moment. It's a good firm. We lost. And, you know, you take it on the chin. That's as the NPF was being formed right at the beginning, I think in some way they did benefit from it. They've done a good job. But this increase to me is just extraordinary. And I heard Terry say that wonderful phrase, on balance. Now, I normally, after 40 years of planning, find that on balance means there are actually some doubts about this. So I said I'd keep an open mind. I'll listen to what other people say, but it's you know, if any of you've seen the roads there, I think they tried to say that it was damaged by tractors. Well, it may well have been. You're right. Fairfields crisps up the road. But actually, when you see these enormous HGVs, you try and go down that road without falling into potholes that you could drown double-decker buses. It's just incredible. It's the wrong place, but we've got to accept the fact that it's there. But didn't we have an expansion for timber clearance, timber movement not that long ago? Then we had another expansion for 2 warehouses. It's a bit like Topsy. It keeps growing, it grows and grows. And again, I'll reiterate, it's a really good firm. They do a damn good job. And at the time of that appeal, probably just as much now, but the environmental issues are really coming through. And that's why the NPPF, I think, it was a great surprise to me and to us, all of us, on both Colchester and on the county council, that this was allowed. But as you said, it had an existing permission for a small operation, not this. 150 vehicle moves, up from 50. That's what sticks in my throat. But I will listen to what other people say. And I am always well aware that I'm minded to accept always officers' recommendation. But on this one, I have some doubts. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Giles. Councillor Septon.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got several points I'd like to raise, but I will pick up on Councillor Giles' point there about the roads on 2 situations. One is you did mention about noise. Does that include the vibration? Because looking at the map that I have in front of me is that some of the properties are quite near to the road. With the increase in the number of vehicle movements, I don't know whether they're older properties or newer properties. I can't tell from the drawing here. What effect that's going to have on the surrounding properties. So that was a concern that I had. Damage to the road, Councillor Giles already picked up on that, the potholes. Best will in the world, the more you increase, the more damage you get to the road is caused, not by the cars, but by the HG vehicle fee. So is there any mitigation in that against us having to repair the road and the cost to our highways, for example. Can I ask the officer if he could put up the map, the first one that's on the slides? I can refer to, please. Next page, I think it is, that one. Okay, I wanted to raise an inquiry about, on the site there, it's got a pond. And I note in the adjacent property there to the, on the left of the drawing there, that there's quite a lot of water courses, there's a moat, I think, and other ponds. Obviously, the water table is quite close to the surface there. What mitigation is put in place to stop any leachate getting through from the pond into the watercourse to the adjacent watercourses? Because they're fairly close. Going by the scale of the map, I think they're about the same distance away, the length of the building, which is not too far away. The other query I wanted to raise was, with the best will in the world, a site like this does produce a lot of stuff blowing around in the wind and what have you. How are they mitigating the fencing on stuff blowing across onto other properties? I noticed on the second drawing that they've got a number of trees and things. Hopefully that will stop most of it, but what are they putting in place to try and stop the stuff blowing around?
Quite a list there, Terry. Have you got them all?
Thank you, Chair, Councillor. Take the last two, the mitigation and the leachate. Remember, this is an approved site that's already approved. It's not before us for determination. All we're looking for is the application for increasing tonnage and the vehicle numbers. In answer to your question, that's the revised pond, which is from the previous plan. It's down in the bottom left-hand side. The pond is in the centre, a sump which has been approved. It's nature conservation as well, and it holds their recycled water, so they can do near enough 100% recycled. Dust mitigation, water requirements, etc. They also have an underground tank. In terms of the linkage between that water body and off-site water bodies, they were looked at under the previous applications, and there's no issues in terms of that. But so in terms of dust mitigation, etc., again, like I mentioned with the noise, we have extant conditions on that particular site which addresses noise, dust, etc., and the provision of demisters or netting around the timber recycling parts of the site. So again, they're in place as opposed to what's the application which we're looking at the present moment. It just relates to the internal tonnages going through the buildings and the vehicle numbers visiting the site. In terms of damage and road costs, I'll leave that to my worthy colleague here in terms of that, but it's just like anything else. It's ultimately, how do you actually prove it's their lorry doing that with the potholing compared to all the other vehicles onto that? We all paid for, I suspect, the potholes of this world, and that comes through the bits like council tax, etc., and road insurance. So I think trying to pin it down to the companies, I think we're probably on the hide into nothing there. We wouldn't be able to support that, and we probably wouldn't be able to actually define which vehicle did that with the pothole damage, etc. That's not to say no, roads are bad, and they are nationally, and they do get worse, etc. In terms of noise increase, our noise consultants, again, with the original application when it came in, sorry, 0918, which is the current mother permission for the particular site. Stuff like noise on the public highways, the vibration, the body banging, etc., was looked at by the various consultants and was deemed acceptable. Again, it's down to good vehicle management and having a new vehicle fleet like they've got themselves. A lot of this is muffled in terms of chain rattling, etc. And it's one of the benefits of having liaison groups. But when we actually sit on the liaison groups, and we have one on this particular site, a voluntary one, that if people do have concerns about vehicles going past, and yeah, we heard one at 6:35 this morning with chains rattling, the companies can actually look at those and address what caused those particular rattles. But in terms of overall, Vibration has not been seen as an issue in relation to this particular application, and with our noise consultants have come from in terms of that was recommending that the various noise conditions and the increases that the applicants have proposed in terms of background noise levels as a result of increases with the traffic, they are acceptable within terms of the planning and in terms of what the planning approval, if one were forthcoming, would set as the particular limits. So in terms of vehicles trundling up and down the streets, that has not been seen in terms of vibration, etc. That's a specific issue relevant to this one that was being picked up by our noise consultants as an issue in that respect. I think that was
Trees,
it, wasn't it? Noise and increase?
yeah, trees and any potential flying of particles in it.
Particles coming up the site, I would again tie that down to now the existing monitoring arrangements on this particular site. We don't now, with the building having gone up, the secondary building, we did have original concerns that when the timber, as Councillor Giles referred, when we had the application in for the timber handling outside, we had bays put up. The company erected demisters, etc., to keep the dust issues down. There were concerns when it originally went up from one or two of the neighbours that there was noise and dust coming from particular operations. That was addressed with the on-site demisting programme, and the provision of this particular secondary building, it was recognised at the time, that would also act as a screen to what was happening within the site itself. So it became a buffer between the existing operations, which are taking place outside, with the vehicles offloading and unloading pallets, and the timber operations, between those operations and the third-party reps living off to the west of the site. So that building, in a sense, has had a benefit of reducing any particular concerns. Not that there were issues beforehand, but they were addressed previously. The icing on the cake would have been that building going in, which it is. It's been an acoustic and a visual screen to all concerned. And I think to date, we've had very little objections raised by neighbours living next door for operations taking place within that particular part of the site itself. So it's acted as a good screen.
So before I come back to you, Matt, do you want to come in? Matt Bradley hasn't been to a committee for a while, but he's here for obvious reason. Do you want to what your comments are on? There's been a few.
Obviously, road maintenance is obviously a topic of conversation always, particularly with the budgets the way they stand at the moment, and there is obviously a priority in terms of dealing with potholes, which Essex have got. I mean, unfortunately, with planning applications such as this, it doesn't provide any sort of mechanism lawfully to allow us to take any kind of contributions towards maintenance and upkeep of the highway. That's a duty on the Highway Authority to undertake that. The only scenarios where we can do something is where kind of new works are being carried out by a developer. And new works are being carried out particularly to facilitate their development. And we're able to take commuted sums for ongoing maintenance because that work wouldn't have been required if a development happened. But that's not the situation we've got here. We've already got a significant volume of HGVs already using the network, and this is obviously uplifting that. And that will be something that the Highway Authority will be under. It's a PR2 route. It will be under a normal maintenance regime that we have, and would identify faults in connection with anyone else who would on the network.
Thank you. Did you want to come back in your points?
Chairman, I was less concerned about the noise that the vehicles themselves make, rattly trains, as you mentioned there. I was more concerned about the vibration, particularly if there is an increase in the potholes, because let's be honest, they're inverse humps, it's the other way around. And of course, that will increase the lot of the vibration. So I'm not totally convinced that there will not be an increase in the vibrations into the surrounding properties. That does concern me.
Thank you. Councillor Crowe next.
Okay, thank you, Chair. My apologies, I missed the first two meetings since I was put on this committee, but I certainly feel like I've been thrown in at the deep end on this one. I know the company, as John says, they do good work. They're a very, very good company. They're a local success story in Colchester, and we'd always want to support our local businesses and what they do as well, which is so important. But I grew up in 8 Ash Green. That's one of the villages affected by this. I lived there till I was 13 years old. I had a very good school friend who lived in Fordham, so I used to cycle that route regularly through the summer holidays, Easter holidays, backwards and forwards. And with the number of vehicle movements, the number of HGV movements along there at the moment, my mother would not have been letting me cycle that route. It is an unsuitable route for that kind of vehicle in those numbers. And to increase that the way this is proposed, I find that off the scale. It's unthinkable on that road. With these vehicles not only travelling in both directions, passing each other frequently, I feel, as well as the damage to the road, which we cannot be compensated for, the danger it poses, the damage to properties from the vehicle movements, the vibrations. This sadly is the wrong location. It's very much the wrong location for this business. And I am really struggling with this.
Thank you, Councillor Crowe. There wasn't any questions or anything for Terry to pick up. Councillor Bear Flynn.
Thank you, Chairman. We keep hearing that it's in the wrong place, etc., but we have to accept what is there now. However, as Matthew's here, what I think everybody sitting around or councillors sitting around this table will be concerned about is a substantial increase in traffic on that kind of road. Because in our minds, common sense tells you that that kind of road really is not made suitable, etc., for that amount of traffic and the weight of that traffic. So what I would like to understand is how highways get to the fact that they don't object to it, if you get what I mean, because I do struggle with that a lot of the time, but this is so obvious and it's such a big increase in traffic and the size and the weight of the traffic that I really don't understand. Thank
I
you.
think that's a question directed to you, Matt. Bypass Terry.
I totally accept and I understand everything that's gone on and the history of this site and that kind of thing. I think when we've got a planning application that we're looking at from a highway viewpoint, obviously, one of the things is the characteristics of the road and that kind of thing. The road in this particular situation is it averages, I mean, it's around about 5.5 metres wide. It's kind of like the minimum that you could get for passing 2 HGVs slowly. So that's so they can pass. But I totally accept that when you're travelling at this kind of speeds that are kind of probably beyond, possibly 40 miles an hour and that kind of level, that there will be no doubt some overrun and that kind of damage when kind of vehicles do pass each other. But equally, there are lots of other HGVs for other uses using that road along there, and there's also a significant amount of agricultural traffic that would be operating there. I think there's around sort of 3,000 vehicles a day use that route, just to sort of put it in perspective. One of the things that we have been successful in looking at is down at the bottom end of here, where we're joining back onto the main road. There is a new Bellway development there, and we've secured a new 6.75 metre road through that development that will provide some relief to the sort of the community at that end of Fordham Road on Fiddler's Hill, as it is. So there is a kind of a small section that can be sort of bypassed in that respect, which provides some relief to this. And then also there is, in terms of accidents, there's an accident investigation that has been undertaken as part of the transport work supporting this. And it's identified a cluster of accidents at the actual junction of Packard's Lane with Fordham Road, which is the one that was already explained about. And looking at those accidents, they're not actually they're not currently involved in HGVs at that access. And I suspect that's probably because HGVs are of the size they are. And when somebody's driving an HGV, obviously it's a kind of forward control. You're sitting above the wheels. You've got good visibility. I think all of the accidents that seem to be occurring at the moment at that junction appear to be kind of failure to give way type accidents from cars and that kind of thing. But having said that, you know, if there's going to be an increase in vehicle movements through that junction, then it's something that ought to be looked at and sort of addressed as part of this planning application. Ultimately, and I'm going to sort of steer everybody back to the National Planning Policy Framework, the bar has been set very high for us. Unless we can demonstrate that there's an unacceptable impact on highway safety, or that the cumulative impact of this development is going to be severe, then it's unfortunate that, you know, we're not going to be able to raise any kind of substantial objection to this. You know, that I've got no kind of evidence before me of the operation of the current network that's going to cause, you know, harm in relation to the uplift in vehicle movements, and that's really framed our response back to this application.
Thank you, Matthew.
Councillor Thorogood.
Yeah, just sort of pick up on what Councillor Steele said earlier about being in the wrong location, and where is the right location. If we were to grant this permission, and obviously I want to see more waste being recycled, and we've heard that it's a very good company in doing that process. But if we give permission for this, are we taking, you know, if we're taking it away from somewhere else which is more suitable, or is this waste, is it mainly from Essex? Is it going to end up going out of the county and having to travel further, or the opposite? Is this company's contract to bring waste in from out of the county? Do we know any of that at all?
Terry?
Well, most of it's commercial, so what happens between companies and how they actually get their contracts is a commercial matter, which doesn't have any bearings on the planning side of things. Having said that, as members have recognised and it's been picked up on, the company are successful in what they do. I think they've quoted in delays on meetings, they're near enough down to 99.9% diversion from landfill. So wherever they take their waste, whether they win a contract from the applicants here, but it's just my experience of seeing what they're doing, etc. If they do win contracts from someone else, chances are they're going to handle that waste a lot better at 99.9% diversion than other contracts. But ultimately, I don't know what's on their books in terms of that. And what they win in the commercial market is down to themselves. But they do, evidence from this application coming through, they've got the efficiency there. They demonstrated diversion away from landfill in line with all the sustainability developments, etc. And it's been picked up on one or two of the other members. Now, the National Planning Policy Framework has changed since when it came out in 2012. Now the focus is economic development, sustainability, environmental, which they're ticking the boxes, which goes back to that reluctant, we don't have a planning issue on that. But down to your comments, whatever the contractor gets now or in the future, they will still have to work through an approved site which still has existing conditions. If those contracts then suddenly require a change, that would have to be a new application, chances, which would come before you guys. But at the moment, we're just dealing with this application.
It's just that with the commercial waste, we don't know if it's just Essex or if it's coming from outside, do we? We just don't know where it's coming from.
Richard, you want to come in?
It's a great question, and it hinges around the proximity principle and self-sufficiency argument about waste management and where it goes. It's not within planning's remit to dictate where the waste should come from, but what we try and do with policy is ensure that we have sufficient capacity to deal with Essex's own needs, and those sites are located in strategic areas around the county to be able to ensure that the waste source is proximate to the facility, if that makes sense. So this is the north of Kent, so it could be more sustainable for some of Suffolk's waste to come to this facility than perhaps South Essex, because in terms of travel distance, but those commercial contracts are a matter for the operator and are not a planning consideration.
Got councillor McGarren next. Maybe he's going to tell us that the MPPF is going to have a review that we're looking for, is it?
Yeah, and thanks to all the members as well, because I'll be honest, I'm not that familiar with the site or this company, so it's been quite useful to hear some of the comments already made. But there seems to be widespread agreement that this facility is in the wrong location, albeit it's a very good company providing a good service. Therefore, isn't the likelihood, given all that it's a good company providing a good service, that after this application today, in a year or two's time, they'll almost certainly come back with another application to expand the facility again and increase the volume of HGVs once more by who knows how much. And given what's been said today, if they do, the recommendation then will be to accept again.
Terry or Richard,
Yeah, Chairman.
Terry already alluded
I
to
mean,
that.
Terry hinted in his presentation, didn't he, about the capacity of the site as exists. It's a hypothetical question and it's not relevant for the determination of this application right now, because we've got the planning officer's response is each application on its own merits, and we can't predetermine anything that's not come before us. I talked to Terry in the background about what this might mean if there are capacity issues on site, anything else happens. And, the honest answer is that if further development's needed, planning permission would be needed for that, and we'd have to look at that point in time.
I've got Councillor Steptoe and Councillor Aspinall, but I think Councillor Giles would like to come in on that particular subject.
On that particular issue about the location, my memory serves me reasonably well, is that we attempted to find alternative sites and offered alternative sites to them. Certainly Colchester City Council, or Borough Council it was at the time, did, and I'm pretty certain that Essex did as well, in that we proposed several alternative sites. They wouldn't have it. So therefore, in a sense, they self-limited themselves. And my real question on this is that, are they already over capacity with this amount of traffic movement? So yeah, you're absolutely right, Councillor McGarren, that it's in the wrong place. There's no doubt. That was the crux of the argument on all of the other planning applications that were made. That as Terry said, within planning law, I'm stretching my mind as to how the hell can you say no? Because I don't think you can. That's the problem.
Thank you, Councillor Giles. Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to pick up on a couple of the comments that Mr Bradley made earlier on. You spoke about we have to prove that there was a greater concern about safety, and you used the word severe. Define what you mean by severe, because what you mean by severe is very often different to my interpretation of that. As I understand it, there isn't a defined definition in planning terms what severe means. Can you expand on that?
$1,000 question, mate.
Yeah, I think it is $1,000 question, really. Because, we did have some debate over the years as to whether we should provide a definition of it. I think as from a highway viewpoint, it doesn't suit us to have a definition of it because it means different things, as you say, to different people. And I think that we might want to suggest something severe, and it's best if we don't limit ourselves to a definition. And therefore we can deploy it, but that's I think that it needs to be based on something when it comes to severe. So for instance, in this particular scenario, I suppose if you were to be refusing and an inspector was to be reviewing it, then they're going to be looking for some evidence as to why the highway authority are there trying to refuse something. And I suppose one of the evidence basis of that would be kind of whether there's been any accidents, collisions and that kind of thing on the route that you can demonstrate there's been a history of incidents with HGVs along that particular route, and therefore that might be something that might tip the balance, and therefore you would try and raise some kind of defence some kind of planning application as this. But we've looked at the history of the operation of that route and how it's working, and it seems to be working. I don't deny the fact that the things that have been raised about safety for cyclists and things like people like that using that route, but that's kind of something which is kind of, you know, a perceived issue. I've got no evidence to suggest that isn't something that isn't happening, or there's a danger at the moment, you know, and as a result of that, you know, that's really what is constraining us from sort of raising something in this particular circumstance.
You want to come back?
Yeah, could I just add to
Richard.
Matt a little bit? Because this is, in some respects, we have a planning conundrum a lot of the time when we go to highway. Because the Highway Authority really only come back on safety and capacity issues and whether there are any concerns there in terms of severity of impact. What we have to grapple with then as planners is whether there's an impact on amenity and local amenity from that increase in lorry movements as well, that the Highway Authority wouldn't normally come back on. And in this case, this is why Terry's gone out to the noise consultant and looked at what's the impact on local amenity from that increase in lorry movements. And we don't have anything in front of us to justify on that amenity, the amenity position, a reason for refusal on those particular grounds. So, you know, from the highway position, it's safety, capacity and severity, and then added to that is amenity. But we'll look at that from a planning position as well about what the impact of the increase is on amenity, and we don't have anything in front of us to enable a recommendation for refusal.
Come back.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it does boil down to interpretation of severe. I've come across this on other planning applications, certainly locally, where it has just been that word alone that the inspectors had to adjudicate. I would have said perhaps an increase of 20 movements a day would have been acceptable, but I would have interpreted 100 extra movements a day. It's a severe change. So I think this is where I think we're going to have to discuss and think, but I do feel that it's quite a severe change.
Thank you, Councillor Steptoe. Councillor Aspinall, we've been waiting very patiently.
Thank you, Chairman. Highways can't help us, not through one trying, I'm sure, planners can't help us. I'm unclear as to how the SIL 106 arrangements work on an existing company. If they're increasing, I don't know. That's probably doesn't even apply. But it would be easy to say, and going back to Susan's query right at the beginning, the amount of movements in addition would indicate that the profits of this company would increase. I'm not going to say it's going to double, but it would increase substantially. And we've got a road that they are putting under the thumb, so to speak, but their movements basically destroying. It is inconceivable that they cannot contribute to that maintaining that road to a safe, proper standard for other road users apart from themselves. So there must be something we can do as an authority, surely, in putting a cap on expansion in some way. Otherwise, it's ridiculous. Like my colleague said over there, it comes back in a couple of months' time or a year's time to double it again. What are we going to do? There must be a way, collectively, local districts, us, MPs, can talk about a framework, planning, or I don't know. I know I'm talking in the dark here because it's something we don't do with often. One question I will ask that Terry will be able to answer is there any residual waste that doesn't go to recycling? And if so, where does it go?
Terry?
I think as I mentioned, Councillor, thank you for that. From what they've been saying to us, I think it was 99.9% diverted from landfill. The landfill would probably go to the nearest one, and I think they've quoted to me in the past they would go up to the nearest one, which would be Bellhouse. But available landfills which could take those particular wastes, I know they are open to any operator to dispose of, but they're a responsible operator, so it does go to a licensed landfill site.
Any more comments about the lack of ability of securing? I think you've covered that earlier on, and yeah, there is no planning.
Frustrated, isn't it?
Very frustrating, very absolutely. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chairman. Whichever way we go, I do query the recommendations on page 41. So we go to junction A, let's do a road junction improvement. Then junction B says, but if they don't do the road junction improvement, then they do something else instead. And they direct people down John Flower Avenue. Let's look at your Google. John Flower Avenue is currently the subject of massive housing development and doesn't actually appear to be a through road at the moment. So I'm just wondering, you know, we're picking on John Flower Avenue, which seems to have a bellway development going on at the southern end of it. Well, why would we direct everyone past those houses rather than another group of houses? And does John Flower Avenue actually join up with the road on top? Because on Google Maps here, it doesn't. So but I also don't understand the recommendation. You see a normal planning recommendation, it says there will be 35% affordable housing and you will do this before you occupy the 100th house. How can you say, let's have a road junction improvement, but maybe they choose not to do that? I mean, if John Flower Avenue does work, that is the preferred route, fine, but I think we do need to check it is a through route. And actually, wouldn't you object to the brand new resident if suddenly every single HGV from this development went past your front door?
You wouldn't want to buy a house there, no?
But, you know, I don't know, because I'm not, you know, a culturist person. And a voluntary agreement to the routing of lorries, why voluntary? Get it there in black and white. This is the way they go. I mean, Sean knows the issue I have with lorries in my patch, but you know, they're taking the only route they can, as it were. And why are these so wishy-washy? If they don't increase it, make them do the road junction improvement before they do the increase. Or, you know, they seem really not very firm to me, and I would like to be sure that John Flower Avenue does join up, because it doesn't appear to on the map.
Who wants to go first? Terry or Matt?
Do you want to explain?
Yeah. I mean, John Flower Avenue Road will join up. Obviously, the way in which he's constructed will be under Section 38 agreement with the developer. And then Essex County Council will go through a certification process as that road is constructed. I think there is a kind of trigger on there that they can only occupy certain houses before the road is actually opened up. And I believe that it is anticipated that will be sometime next year that occurs. So the actual the condition that was suggested by us as well in terms of the signage was we weren't clear whether the developer's signage that would come as part of the opening up that road would necessarily include the right signage that were required for perhaps sending lorries along that particular route, and that's why we were covering ourselves with a further condition on this one. So it would either be that this developer would be responsible for it, or Bellway Developments would be when they actually open up the road. And it does provide a kind of, I mean, I think it's being constructed to a 6.75 metre width, so it is much more of a kind of a wider road than the existing sort of section which goes through the actual sort of the actual local community at that end. So it is a significant benefit there.
Terry, do you want to pick up the things about?
I'm just going to pick up on two. Thanks, Councillor, for picking up on those. Yeah, I did question subsection B with the highways at the time, and on that. Were planning approval forthcoming, they would have to provide that junction before they got their pause on the planning permission. So no junction, no planning permission gets issued in that sense. So they would have to get that road junction sorted out. In terms of the voluntary agreement, if you look in the 2 paragraphs above the recommendation, I've actually addressed that issue. Bearing in mind that if that was requested by Highways, if it was a operator with 100% of those vehicles under their control, a routing agreement, yeah, we can deal with that. But bearing in mind that there's a lot of third-party vehicles visit the site itself, they would not be under the control of the applicant. So whilst a voluntary agreement would be in place, its benefits would be questionable, but it's better than nothing, and I've said that in the report onto that. It'll probably be a reminder to the operator if they did get planning approval. Well, we signed up to a voluntary agreement, and someone could probably come back and say, why are your vehicles off route? It has that bit of weight. But in terms of the general, and bearing in mind there's a large number of third-party vehicles, they wouldn't be under the control. The company could volunteer, but that would be down to the operators themselves which way they wanted to go. So in terms of having a routing agreement, it's voluntary. It's best as that.
Richard?
Planning guidance more or less says that condition is not appropriate for lorry routing agreements because they're unreasonable and unenforceable. Essentially, if somebody pays their road tax and can travel on that road, they're entitled to travel on that road. And unless there's a lorry ban or a weight restriction, then the lorry is free to travel on that particular road. But also, if there was, and they have to gain access to a site that's in the middle of that restriction, anyway, they can gain access. So our hands are quite tied on that.
I'm just very concerned that we are selling people brand new houses. They have no concept. We're going to route all these lorries past their front door. I shouldn't think the developer does either. I don't know where that leaves us legally.
Should come up in the search. And that's not planning.
Why should it come out in the search? We haven't given permission yet. You'd have great problems searching this, wouldn't you?
Well, then now there is a recycling site. And then
It's a lovely new development site with houses fronting this road frontage, which is about to have, apart from these lorries, other lorries trumping up and down from the sounds of it.
Councillor Henry.
I find this committee incredibly frustrating, honestly, don't I? Because it feels like you come into the room, you've got the agenda and your hands are tied behind your back and you can't represent the people that you're elected to represent in the ways that you want to. I'm really, really deeply frustrated. I think Councillor Aspinall has covered a lot of points that I wanted to make about the investment in our roads. But Matthew mentioned earlier on that the road was sufficiently wide enough for lorries to be passing at a reasonable speed. What is the speed limit of that road and what are the enforcement regulations of the road to ensure that that does happen safely for residents? I think one of my biggest concerns for this whole thing is that sort of loss of local identity. You've got these 4 little areas that are literally, and I wonder about the impact of shoving another 100 lorries on Parkway a day in every, what that would look like in a major, fairly cosmopolitan city like this, what the impact of that would be, or in Billericay High Street, or in, in Langdon. And for me, it's a colossal change. It's a colossal change. It's not about the company. All the companies that we've had plans in here for good, solid businesses with good, steady leaders, taking it in the right direction. This is about the impact on these villages, the impact on the residents, and the fact that we as elected officials, just like elected people to parish councils, aren't being heard. We're having our hands tied behind our backs. What is the condition of the road? One of the parish councils mentions that it's about 3.5 miles of tatty road that's not in a great condition now. What will be the impact on this business when that road absolutely collapses on itself? We've only got to have one very particularly hard, wet autumn followed by a freezing cold autumn. That will break up entirely. What's the impact on local residences and this business when we have to put a TRO in to replace the whole damn thing, or even just patch it? I'm not sure if there was a question in there. There may be.
There's one around the speed limits, I think, that Matt's going to pick up.
It's really the impact of these lorries. You talked about particularly the width of that. That's a bigger concern for me than maybe even the condition of the roads, because we have Lower Dunton Road where we are. We've got Dunton Road, lots of 4 reasonable sized villages that have lost their identity because they've been morphed into a new town. This feels kind of like it's heading in that direction, but they've got pretty decent roads for the most part. What is the width? What can we do about that width?
Yeah, I mean, very little. I mean, the road width is kind of effectively what the road width is, and I mean that's largely historic. I suspect there may have been some minor widening that's carried out when new surfacing is put down on the roads and that kind of thing. I mean, the observation, I suppose, is that it is marked out with a centre line, I think, for the majority of the route. you put a centre line in place when you've got a minimum width of 5.5 metres. So that's what would then allow a centre line to go in, and that doesn't necessarily mean that there's sufficient space within that lane to accommodate all vehicles that will use it. That's just what the guidance in the manual for roads and bridges is in terms of kind of when you can put a centre line on a road. So it's at the minimum end of that, and there is kind of there is guidance that vehicles can pass each other slowly in 5.5 metre width, and that must happen already on that particular route. But you're right. I mean, there will be sometimes at the expense of the verge, and that happens. You know, but obviously, we see that a lot in terms of what we do, and we're really limited in terms of what we can do about that and what we can say about it. In terms of the actual speed limits along there, I think, I mean, by large, it's sort of national speed limit. I had a quick look at the figures. I couldn't download it, but you know, the people are obviously travelling at that speed on there, whilst they're entitled to it, they won't be limited by the kind of the bends in the road and the forward visibility constraints on the road. And travelling much less than that. And then there's a 30 mile per hour speed limit through Fordham village, and I think it goes on to a 40 at the edge of the village before you get to the junction that we've been talking about, the required for the young improvement.
I just want another point of clarification from Terry, something that he said to her. I can't remember. He said that there was no point in putting those restrictions in because it would only affect this business, but not the, and I think he said, good number of third-party visitors to the site. Do we have any idea what that good number of third-party visitors?
So I don't have a breakdown of the HGV types visiting the site. I think the travel consultant had an overall number, which I questioned as well, because in their table which they sent through, it was headed CHS environmental vehicles, which made me think, have they excluded third-party lorries delivering or picking up the products? But I checked with them and they said, no, that was everybody going into that particular site, and that was measured from 2 measuring points on Packard's Lane and Fordham, so it picked up all vehicles going in. But the development itself has a lot of deliveries coming in by Colchester Skips, I use their old name, vehicles, skips and low-load HGVs, but they also get a number of vehicles bringing in material out with their own company, but also a number of the HGVs come in with big Arctics, and they use the pallet system, which packs up, and they go straight off to their markets, and they're usually third-party lorries which deliver to the final marketplace.
And that's within the 150 in?
The total which they're proposing is the numbers going in, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Including stairs and other departments. Councillor Steptoe.
Yeah, excuse me. I've got a lot of experience about access to the tips. Where I live, there is a tip not far from me, it's called Barling. There was a major problem with the access roads around that, in a very similar way to this. The roads are very narrow, etc., etc. The company there actually put in their own access road, and that's something in a region of about 2.5, almost 3 miles long, going across the fields. I'm a little surprised that companies such as this, knowing the problems, hasn't looked at doing something along those lines.
Comment on that, anyone?
It helps.
It's not part of the application, is it?
Not part of the application, but I'm just thinking,
good point.
Where they're going to put the new road across the countryside.
Well, in the case of Barling, yes, that was the case, but it was on the proviso when it then eventually closes, it goes back to.
I think in terms of this particular site now, their road improvements at the time when they got the planning appeal and they started to develop into a larger business, they created the Bellmouth, which had been in line with highway requirements to link on. So that element is, in terms of, as soon as they get onto the public highway system, which is right next door to the site, they utilise the public highway. Yes.
Councillor.
Thank you. Pick up on something Councillor Aspinall said, which perhaps contend it. There ought to be a way, I think he said there ought to be a way a company like this contributes towards maintenance of the road. Well, there is, it's called road tax and it's called road user levy. So I think picking up with with the point that was made over here as well, anybody who runs a trucking system pays a road tax and have the right to use the roads. Trying to control HGVs going through villages by the planning process, I don't think is viable. Because we've all got that problem. We've got the problems around me. I've got a big quarry near me, and you know, people are upset by the quarry logs coming out. So I just think we're in a position where we have to accept.
Councillor Flynn.
Yes, Chairman, we all feel the same, we know that. So I'll test the water and be very unpopular. And I'll move officer's recommendation with the addition of the extra condition of Good Fridays.
On page 52.
Yeah.
Is there anyone that's going to second that? Councillor Still. Okay. That's been duly proposed and seconded. I will, and there's no other further speakers. I'll go to the vote. All those in favour of the recommendation, please show.
Okay, I'm gonna start again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favour.
All those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 against, so that's carried.
Very narrow, very close, carried. Thank you, members, for your contribution on that debate. And we can just wait and see what happens next, can't we?
Chairman, just before we continue, could our officers indicate to Colchester Skip Hire that any further expansion would be much more severely viewed? Just an indication as and when you get back to them that.
I think, councillor, they're probably listening in.
Yeah.
At the moment.
I suspect they probably are, but yeah, I think it needs to be made quite clear that there is a limit to how far they can go.
The thing is, we have been amply explained the rules as they stand are in the favour, and we can only hope the review of the MPPF to address the severe level. I think it should be much more explicit in the way of evidence needed. How many vehicles does it make it severe? You know, how long are you going to wait in a traffic jam before it makes it severe? And the examples are not within the MPPF, are they?
If anything, the current consultation on the MPPF is making it a little bit broader or less distinct, but we shall see.
Okay, thank you very much, members. Are we okay to carry on? We got the next item, which is 5.1 Ashwell Road, Pilgrim Hatch in Brentwood. That's in the hands of Sean. Members will see that there is a confidential appendix, but we'll have to move into it, but we'll have to deal with the public one first, and then we'll move into the next one. So Sean, I'll over to you.
Chairman, good morning, members. I'm not going to necessarily recap on the background information that's been listed in the report. I hope you had a chance to read that, but essentially, obviously following members' resolution in July 23, and we've obviously, and the enforcement evidence not being met, we instructed ELS to seek prosecution. We've now obviously received updated information in respect to this, and therefore members have been presented with a further report consideration, including the confidential appendices.
Okay, thank you, Sean. There's a recommendation on page 74, which I would like to deal now, and I understand there might be some question on the appendix. Would anybody like to move the recommendation, or shall we go, Councillor Giles?
I'll move the recommendation, but I suspect that we will have a debate on the second confidential part.
Okay. Councillor Bassman seconded. All those in favour, please show.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. So what we'll do is there's no members of the public or press here present, so we will pause the recording. I'll alter the agenda